Chris Farrell. He's the head of training and development for the CES group. He's also the head of the Delta Center in Dublin and a Delta trainer. He's a committee member for the TDSIG in the area of scholarly publications. Sorry, he does so many things. I don't know how he does them all.
Loads of other things. You don't have to worry about it.
Lots of other things that you can read on screen. And I really, really wish you gave us some management tips, Chris, because time management tips, because I could use them. So thank you all for being here with us today. And thank you, Chris, so much for having made the time with all these things that you do
Well,
to talk to us about how to move your school online today.
Thank you very much, Federica, and it's great to see so many people from so many different countries. It's just amazing the variety of countries coming in. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Hola, merhaba, salam alaikum, namaste. I can't do all the languages, I don't know. I'm going to talk today about moving your school apparatus online, especially with the current situation and kind of the speed which everyone has had to move their operations online. One of the big things which is clearly been an issue in the past few months is the amount of teachers who have moved online and not with support of their school apparatus. So the amount of teachers which have been who have been isolated online with the teachers and the students, and without actually the school apparatus and the management systems following them into the online context. So what I'm going to talk about today forms the basis for a NILE course called Take Your School Online. In this NILE course, we looked at accreditation criteria for face-to-face schools in a number of different contexts, and we tried to see which exact accreditation criteria will need to be modified in the move to online, and which will need some small little changes, and which needs a complete overhaul. The main, I guess, principle behind the whole thing is that with the current situation, we've moved online quickly. Now we have to do it properly. If we are to ensure that we're providing the best service to our teachers, we're supporting to our students, we're supporting our teachers in the best way, and we are ensuring that the quality which we guarantee in a face-to-face context is transferred into an online context. We have to look at the transition of the whole school operation. So the main document I've looked at in terms of the accreditation standard is Eaquals. It's a European-based organization for inspection and accreditation of language services, but they're branching out now. I think they have schools in South Africa and in Arabia as well, and also Aqueduto, who have a quality framework in online education. So we've generally used the two of them as the starting point for this analysis. In using them, we've looked at what makes a quality educational institution. So what is a good school? What does a good school do? There's 12 different areas we've looked at in terms of what makes a good educational institution. The first 6, management and administration, academic resources, staff profile and development, staff employment terms, internal communication and external communications, generally in the transition from face-to-face into online, need very little modification. So if you have clear standards and policies in these 6 areas, the move to online shouldn't affect that too much. Now, you've obviously got issues with, staff employment terms might change if the hours of education, the class hours change. Academic resources are also going to need a rethink in terms of what type of resources you're going to source, what type of resources are acceptable and stuff like that. But these are what we would consider minor modifications. The big modifications come in other areas. So with these 6 areas, we're pretty happy. They're generally okay in our move from face-to-face school into an online school. However, in these 6 areas, we will need to have quite big considerations for some of them. For the first one, learning environment, we're thinking about a complete modification of our learning environment. Now we have some policies and practices in place which suggest what our learning environment should look like. So all we really have to do is think about tools which allow us to recreate this type of learning environment. So it actually only requires a little bit of a rethink, a little bit of a modification. Course design and supporting systems, especially in terms of supporting key stakeholders in the education process and designing courses which are appropriately with appropriately achievable learning outcomes in an online context. This is a big consideration. And client services, we consider areas like non-pedagogical spaces in a class, in a school. If you've got a school which is face-to-face, you've got a lot of opportunities for peer-to-peer development, peer-to-peer education, socialization, stuff like that. In an online context, not as much. But these three areas down the bottom, teaching and learning, assessment and certification, and quality assurance, all require major surgery, major modification in the move from face-to-face schools into an online context. And these are the three which we're going to primarily analyze today. Now, I really understand that because we've got a variety of people from all over the world, there's such a wide variety of contexts. So I'm going to try to keep things as general as possible. There's an opportunity to ask questions at the end if there's anything really specific. There's an understanding that although we're not all in the same boat, we're all facing the same storm. So we do have certain things which are transferable across a range of contexts. But of course, I will endeavor to fulfill all of your questions at some point. First one is teaching and learning, the first area we're going to look at, and obviously this is fundamental to what you do as an educational institution, how you facilitate the development of learners' language abilities, and how you train the teachers and support the teachers to be able to do this consistently. Our key considerations, areas of quality. The first one is the quality of course delivery consistently provides opportunities for effective learning, and we have to ensure that as an educational institution. So in a face-to-face context, we have things like observation. We can get student feedback very easily, and we can have student focus groups, things like this, where we have an idea of how to assess quality in course delivery. One of the big issues in online, well, two of the big issues in an online context is we don't have that ease of observation. We don't have this clear policies and procedures that we can really see what's happening in a classroom. And secondly, frequently from a management perspective, we do not have that apprenticeship of observation to know what quality in online education looks like. We do not have a good idea of the standards of best practice and what a good lesson should look like, and how we can help teachers to make that lesson better, make their lesson better, and how we can best support students to be able to learn in an online context. But frequently, students are not prepared for online learning. We're also looking at lessons being planned with reference to the course program and the learning and motivational needs of individuals. Now, knowledge of the learning and motivational needs of individuals is massive, and this is where the human element almost, or the face-to-face element of the real world classroom comes to the fore, and it's lacking obviously in the virtual classroom. We find it very difficult to build a rapport online. We find it very difficult to engage learners online. We find it very difficult to really understand the motivational needs and to constantly adapt to the individual motivational needs of learners. So we need to think, how can we do this in an online context? How can we reframe our processes to be able to do this in an online context? We also want to focus a little bit on learner training. We want the learners to be able to develop their own study skills and to be able to think, that's how I can learn a language. Now I need to go away to an asynchronous place, so a non-live place for assignments or your virtual learning classroom or whatever, for them to be able to develop the skill which you have been helping them with. So it's a really good way of enhancing the educational process by taking advantage of some of the online tools in order to help learners develop their study skills. And this is an area where the online environment actually has an advantage over the face-to-face environment, and we should really jump on that advantage. Now, I'm going to ask for a little bit of participation. I know I've got hundreds of people here. I don't know how well this is going to go, but I want you to think about your context and your move to online. And I want to think about how you can monitor quality. If you're a manager and you've got 10 classes, 20 classes, 30 classes in your school, and you want to think, how do I know what's going on in that classroom, and how can I begin to say, yes, that class is a quality class because I've seen this evidence. I want you to go on to www.menti.com and use the code 691595, and I just want you to type in your idea or what you think, a method or a tool or a way that you could monitor quality in teaching and learning online. I hope this works. Obviously, as I said, everyone is in a different context, so everyone is going to be coming up with different solutions, motivating the students. That's the first one in. Everybody's going to be coming up with different solutions which are applicable to their context. What we hope to have here is to be able to build up that community of practice and allow you to see whether you're in Iran, whether you're in Turkey, Italy, Brazil, or wherever, that you can see everybody is in the same content, in the same boat when we're thinking about these issues. Making students complete a survey. Yes, I like that. Survey. Easy. Feedback, observations. Student well-being, having student well-being front and center. Observations, I really don't know. Yeah, and that's generally the thing, because we don't have enough information about the context. We don't have enough training in this context. We need to really put our heads together. Providing quality feedback, assessment. Managers drop into Zoom lessons. Student answer when asking questions. Microsoft Teams, G Suite calendars. So assessing language production, live observations, set up specific requirements, provide specific instructions, constructive feedback. Oh, some great ideas. Student feedbacks, chat box. Really great ideas. What I'm going to do at the end of this, so with all of your answers, I can convert them into a PDF, and I'm going to send them on to Federica to be able to be sent on to you, so you can see some of the ideas that other teachers are coming up with, and maybe they are applicable to your context. Some great ideas. A lot of observation, student input, student surveys, and then also building it into the lesson as such, in the actual assessment of success in the lesson. And I think we have overwhelmed, once again, we've overwhelmed Mentimeter. But keep them coming in, keep your ideas coming in. And as I said, I will convert all of that to PDF and we can send it on to you. I have a couple more questions in this session. So you'll hopefully get a couple of different ideas from people, whether they're tools or whether you can see that everybody is talking about surveying students and observing, and they might be the way that you can monitor quality in a teaching and learning in an online context. Super. I'm going to jump on, and as I said, all of that will be available for you. This is some feedback. I did this question before, and this is some feedback I got. So you can see that you've really similar recording, dropping into lessons, other teachers in online lessons, stuff like this, which we're all thinking about. In order to monitor quality, you need to include the students, and you need to also, as a manager, to be in the lessons every now and again, or view a recording of the lesson. So we need to actually have policy tools and policies and procedures in place that allow us to do that without much effort, especially if you've got 30 classes, 40 classes, it can be very difficult for a manager to do that. So that's one, teaching and learning. And it's really the one thing which we need to get right, because currently, as I said, teachers are being isolated in the online context, and we as managers or as school owners or as principals or as senior teachers or whoever are starting to think, well, how can we support teachers? How can we tell them what we think they should be doing when frequently we don't know? So we need to create these models of best practice and get as much information as possible from as many sources as possible. So great. Second thing I want to look at is assessment and certification, and I don't mean formal assessment exactly. I don't mean using something like an IELTS exam or any sort of examining board. I mean assessment which the school will run itself. So if you have, rolling enrollment, maybe you've got a placement test to put the students in a certain class. Maybe you've got a level test to move them up, or whatever. Maybe you've got an end of stage assessment, end of course assessment, something like that. Some sort of assessments which the institution will run in order to best monitor learner progress. And then on the other hand, assessment which the teacher will do in class in order to monitor success in different learning outcomes. So these are big considerations in an online context, because frequently we have this clear educational philosophy that we are sure that our assessment is reliable, it's valid, it's fair, and this is how we assess speaking, this is how we assess writing. And this is not always possible in an online context. Frequently it can be a bit messy. Frequently we have to find the correct tool which will allow us to do this particular thing. Sometimes it can be difficult to know if if the person we've set the test for is doing the test in an online context, and things like this. So we really need to make our assessment procedures clear and choose the correct tools and train teachers in the most appropriate way to ensure that this is done clearly. Placement procedures are appropriate to the learning context and learner needs. And as I said, the systems for assessing competence are reliable, valid, and fair in a way that's appropriate for the course and the learners. So an assessment process which you can stand behind as an institution. And this goes hand in hand with the certification, because if you are a certification giving institution, then you have to ensure that if you put your stamp on that cert, that it is actually the quality which a student doing a face-to-face class would have got. Because if it's not, then it cannot really be the same certification. We have to ensure that there is a clear, a reliable and valid transferability across face-to-face and online in this area. So massive considerations for an institution and for a teacher. So for a teacher, we need to think about having this testing structure, which is school-wide policy. So it could be testing structure which you use only in your class. Every Friday, all the school has this test. It could be the writing class, the writing assessment that the school does at the end of every month. But what tools can you use? How do you set up a testing structure for an online school? Any ideas? Any tools? How would you do it? Do you think it's possible? Certainly, do you think it's possible to have an online testing structure which is similar in quality to a face-to-face testing structure? So again, it should show up on your menti.com, but if you want to go into 691595 and put in whatever idea comes to your mind, no idea too big, no idea too small, all accepted. Yeah. Quizzes, portfolios is a great idea. Yeah, and this is something we'll look at a little bit later on. I think it's a really, really useful way of a continuous assessment. Let me scroll down. Oh, sorry, hold on. Formal, so a live oral exam, which would be really good if we have the time and if we can facilitate it. Google SurveyMonkey, great ideas. Moodle quiz, live worksheets, great ideas. Google Forms. Google Forms seems to be a really, really popular one. Partnership with a testing organization, and people have said this before, if it's possible, that'd be great, because that's their business. Portfolios and quizzes, great guys. Polls, portfolios, quizzes. You see, everyone is really thinking along the same. Mentimeter, Kahoot, quizzes, portfolios, quiz surveys, clear rubric for projects. Forms on platforms, so whole school platforms. Yeah, like if you are using G Suite for Education or using other platforms. Fixed days to do quizzes, perfect. Google Forms, project. Formal assessment, set a time limit. That's great, guys. Recordings, audio recordings and stuff like that would be really, really helpful. Videos on topics, essays, stories, Google Forms. Excellent. So again, I'm going to put all this, I'm going to convert all this to PDF and it will be sent on to you after the session. Yeah, great. Great, Google Forms. So I often consider if you're in an area where Google is not accessible. I know there are some some countries where Google is not accessible, and we have to think about how can we do it without a tool like Google Forms, which is pretty tricky. Essays, excellent, great guys, great ideas. Okay, I'm going to jump on, but as I said, this will all be available for you in PDF after. This is some ideas I harvested in a previous asking of this question, and again, Google Forms, online tests, online placement tests, stuff like that. So a lot of people are thinking along the same wavelength. Google Forms seems to be the easiest one for discrete item tests. You're also going to look at something like look at it later on, something like bulb digital portfolios for the creation of online portfolios, even something like Flipgrid or Edpuzzle, or even having portfolio units in Google Classroom. And stuff like this is going to allow the school to appropriately assess learner development and actually be able for the school to be able to keep the records of learner development, and to ensure that every single student is getting an appropriate level of attention and is being facilitated, their development is being facilitated consistently. The third area I want to look at is QA. With quality assurance, it obviously kind of is an umbrella area for all of these things, but there are specific questions we might have in this area. For example, we need the school to be able to foster a culture of quality with continuous evaluation, reflection, and action. And as I said before, this requires a definition of what is quality in terms of materials, student support, teaching, you know, whatever, lesson planning, classroom management, knowledge of context from the teacher. Can we train the teacher to be more proficient in the medium of delivery? Can we consistently evaluate quality in the organization? So do we know what quality is, and do we have mechanisms for checking? Can we reflect on that as a teacher? Can I watch back one of my lessons and say, yes, I did that well? How do I know? And then how can I act on that? So this is a really goes to the very heart of the conversion from a face-to-face into an online institution, and that idea that you do need to understand what quality is in order to assure it, I suppose. The learning experience, so this is everything which happens with the students, is fully monitored by management systems. So the non-pedagogical spaces, the process of accessing the classroom. So if you're using Zoom, can the student have easy access to it every single time they need it? Do they have easy access to resources? Do they know what to do in case of X, Y, Z? And we're again going to look at safeguarding later on. Do they feel safe? Do they feel comfortable in the online environment, for example? And the institution really has to have in place a good idea of what that looks like and how they can actually check what's happening in the school. You can't just walk down the corridor. The procedures to enable learners and sponsors, if it's parents, for example, to give regular feedback. Frequently what we find with the move to online context is that teachers are siloed in classes with students, and teachers become the only conduit or the only mechanism through which students can complain, students can ask questions about other areas of the school which is non-academic related, and we need to ensure that there are lines of communication which don't go through the teacher all the time. So the students have a direct line of communication to the management, again direct line of communication to the students and to parents if necessary, and etc. And these lines of communication have to be two ways, so we can ensure that we are harvesting feedback as much as possible. So people have already answered some of these. I'm going to activate. Okay, so quality feedback. Amazing. People have put more activities in Zoom. Okay, so the question is, I like people have jumped ahead. The question is, can you set up mechanisms for quality feedback? So people have already said, truly no ideas. Okay, I'll go through them as we have it. Google Forms. One-to-one. Oh, this is from the previous one. Maybe some people have Google Forms, PowerPoint presentations, quizzes. Okay, give me some ideas. Oral activities, one-to-one meetings, video learning management systems, Kahoot, quizzes. Yeah. I was picking up some people have answered from the previous one. It still seems weirdly valid that the assessment and the feedback, we can use similar mechanisms. Microsoft Teams, again, progress test is definitely from the previous one. Kahoot. Never fear, because I already have some answers ready to go for you. I think the Mentimeter is wondering why there's so many people using it from so many different parts of the world all at the same time. No, it's just loading up the same thing again and again for me. At least it waited until the third question to crash Mentimeter. But I can see that you are all commenting, so I'm going to jump forward and then I will come back to it when it's decided to kind of calm down. Has it calmed down? No. Set parameters, emailing our students from SurveyMonkey. Yeah, okay, so we have Kahoot, Mentimeter, which again, a lot of people mentioned in the assessment area. So perhaps, I don't know, it would be a good idea for the institution to ensure that there is a division between the tools you use for assessment and the tools you use for feedback, just not to send that message that feedback is assessment. Okay, I'm going to show you some of the answers I got before, and we can always come back to this. Tutorials seem to be the big one. Online tutorials, feedback oriented culture, SurveyMonkey, Menti after every class, special forms. The one on the bottom right, having somebody in charge of the collection and analysis of feedback, I thought was quite interesting, because I don't know if it always exists in a face-to-face context where you have somebody who actively tries to collect and collate feedback from a wide range of stakeholders to ensure that you as an institution are proactive in dealing with any arising emerging issues, and you understand that if this is generally what's happening with the students, or this is the student experience, then they might have problems with A, B, and C, and we need to react to this. But I do think, especially at the moment when it is all new for everybody, to be able to have procedures in place which are kind of soft touch procedures, which enable you to say, oh, this seems to be a general trend, maybe we need to revise our thinking in this area. I'm just going to go back and see if it's decided to disactivate itself. Okay. Menti. Checklist for each activities. They can see and compare. Okay, video, voice, reflective journal, personal feedback using emails, recording observations of students' reactions. Interesting. Mentimeter, forms, manual feedback. Yeah. Chats in Messenger, feedback and questions. Yeah, joining a lesson from the position of head teacher, survey, personalized feedback, team huddle. Cool. And again, I'm going to put all this in a PDF and it'll be sent on to you because I think it's still loading there. The last thing I want to look at is redefining practice. And this is kind of a mixed bag of different areas which need to be considered but not completely revised. The areas that we're looking at is first one is safeguarding, and this is particularly if you've got young learners. You know, we've got things like using the camera in an online lesson, and etiquette around recording lessons for observation. You know, seeking permissions, things like this. Online etiquette in terms of interaction with the teacher, where you can have your where do you attend the class, you know, what's happening in the background, stuff like this. Very, very important, especially for younger learners. Course design and support systems. So perhaps the course you design and you deliver in a face-to-face context is entirely appropriate in an online context, or perhaps not. Perhaps you need to consider more asynchronous tasks and less synchronous tasks. What I mean by that is, in a face-to-face context, a huge amount of the learning is done in lesson, so live. Whereas perhaps in an online context, we need to consider that it might be a good idea to have a lot of asynchronous tasks. And this might be something as simple as, rather than the teacher spending 20 minutes doing a grammar presentation in the lesson, they can record a slideshow, record their screen using Screencast-O-Matic or Camtasia or something like that, and they're going to be doing their grammar presentation like that, and the students can watch that before the lesson. So before they join the the live lesson, they've watched the grammar presentation, and then the live lesson will be correction and feedback. So a redesign of how we actually deliver lessons and how we assess success in learning outcomes is necessary, I think. And that support systems are, support for the students, support for the teachers. How are we doing that, and in which ways are we doing it? Yeah. And client services is something similar. All of the people who are stakeholders in our business, how are we ensuring that we're the business is acting, the school is acting in their best interest, whether it's parents, whether it's students, whether we are providing appropriate resources, whether we're providing appropriate training for our teachers and things like this. And then finally, the learning environment, what it looks like, connected to safeguarding, but can we ensure that students all feel comfortable, students all feel safe, and students all feel that they are getting a similar education that they would in an online context as they would in a real world context. What do I mean by this? So just some guiding questions for this redefinition. First one is the ensuring of non-pedagogical spaces being fit for purpose. So any spaces which are non-classroom, exactly classroom. So if you are using something like Zoom and your class is from 9 to 10, do you open the Zoom 15 minutes earlier and have 15 minutes after to create some sort of non-pedagogical space for the students to be able to interact in a live capacity? Do you have a virtual classroom in an asynchronous space like Google Classroom, like Flipgrid, something like that, where the students are able to go in and collaborate on different things and also to socialize in some way in a relatively safe environment? And is this a non-pedagogical space which is managed by the institution? I think it's important for the institution to understand that you're never going to replace the real world context, because it's going to be a setup and kind of a fake social context, these non-pedagogical spaces. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be created and they shouldn't be curated and supervised in order to ensure that the students get some peer-to-peer learning as well. What considerations and arrangements are made to protect the health and ensure the safety of learners and staff? And this is directly with safeguarding and ensuring that, as I said, online etiquette and safeguarding procedures are all kept to the fore, because online, regardless of what happens with the students and the teachers, other people can get into Zoom meetings, for example, and it can be unsavory, especially if you've got younger learners. The school's educational philosophy, is it damaged at all by the move to online? Are there any compromises which must be made, or can you ensure that the school's educational philosophy and the key tenets of the school's educational philosophy are still met in the move to online? And I think this is a guiding question which could be used for all of your redefinition. What do you believe that your school should do? What type of education should your school provide? And can you ensure that this is being provided in an online space as well? Do you have systems for monitoring and administrating the provisions of any leisure program? So do you have a social program? This is similar to your non-pedagogical spaces. Do you as an institution want to provide a social program, or is this important for you? A lot of face-to-face schools do provide this. In the move to online, are they going to decide this is not something they do, or are they going to redefine exactly how that is done? These are big considerations, I think. So what can we do? I think number one thing we need to realize is, rather than finding a lot of online tools and saying, oh, we want to use G Suite for education, we want to use Microsoft Teams, we want to use Zoom, come the other way and think, what areas do we need help in? what areas will not transfer directly into an online context, and which areas do we require redefinition or support from a tool or an application online, and then choose the tool to fit the issue. We also can look at opportunities and the enhancement of learning online. So rather than look at the move to online as trying to pigeonhole all of your previous practice into an online context, think how can I redefine and even enhance our practice in an online context? So how can I do this consistently? So our step-by-step is 1, identify your gaps we need to plug. 2, communicate with all key stakeholders, two-way communication with teachers, managers, marketing, whoever, administration, students, parents, whoever. Choose and trial certain online tools which will help you to plug the gaps you need to plug. Begin to normalize operations at an online level. So begin to use and utilize and get feedback and reflect appropriately and think this is how we do things. This is the tool for us. This is what we do. And then creating this consistent feedback mechanism on functionality and performance. And this is functionality of the tool and the tool in context, and performance of the tool and the tool in context as well. And I think these 5 steps are really, really important in this step-by-step slow transition from a real-world school into an online school. For example, if we take one area like moving teaching and learning online, and we think of the quality of course delivery, does it consistently provide opportunities for effective learning? So that's what we want to think about. It does in a face-to-face context. We want to see, does it in an online context? Let's see what we have to consider. We need a mechanism to monitor and assess course delivery. Okay, so in the real world context, we have this. We need to think, how can I monitor and assess course delivery in an online context? And then how can I remedy issues? So we're thinking of trying to find a mechanism that will monitor, assess, and then trying to find a mechanism which will help me remedy issues. So we need a clear communication of quality standards. So we need to understand what quality standards are, and we need to be able to communicate this quality standards with all of the key stakeholders. We're looking at quality in teaching and learning. So we need to understand what it is, and we need everyone else to understand what it is. We need model lessons. We need models of best practice. So we need somewhere that we're going to be able to record and store models of best practice. We need a system of recording and observing lessons. We need this to be procedurally clear in place and logistically possible. And we also need to create synchronous and asynchronous methods of feedback and appraisal, which are consistent and pretty easy to do. So some people have already mentioned you can use something like Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, or other Drive and shared folders in order to put your quality standards documentation in and share with the relevant bodies, or create a Google form or Google Docs where you can co-create standard documentations. Model lessons, if you recorded them on Zoom, for example, they can be stored and shared in a drive in an appropriate context. Even better, you could have, a teacher records lower level listening lesson, puts it in the folder in your Google Drive, lower level listening example, and then they record themselves on something like Camtasia or Screencast-O-Matic. They record themselves commenting maybe over the lesson plan or over a document on some of the lesson choices they made, and then they save them with the model lessons. And this will allow for peer-to-peer collaboration in terms of creation of models of best practice. It will allow for peer-to-peer observing and feedback of lessons. And also it will just enable the school to gain this body of experience on what an online lesson looks like, and for the teachers to begin to justify classroom choices and to begin to understand each other's justification for certain online classroom choices. Camtasia and Zoom and Drive can also be used for the creation of synchronous and asynchronous methods of feedback and appraisal. For example, a teacher can record their lesson on Zoom with appropriate permissions from everybody in the classroom. They can then share this lesson with the manager, and the manager can watch it and then create and fill out a feedback form, and they can record their screen with the feedback form on it. They can record themselves talking about it. So I said this in the feedback area because in the lesson you did this, blah, 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 blah. Then they can send that video back to the teacher. The teacher can watch that, and they can do the same with their own reflection process. And then after that, we can have maybe a synchronous meeting. This is a way that the online classroom is actually better, enhances the quality of feedback, because it allows people not only to give feedback, but to really think about verbalizing that feedback and explaining their thought process, and for the teacher then to be able to listen through that again and again and again, whatever they want to do, give that feedback again back, and then all of that to be saved as an accessible document for all the teachers to see the process of lesson, critique, observation, feedback, reflection, and all of this kind of stuff to exist in a Drive folder, which is models of best practice. So this is a way which our online tools can help us answer this question: quality of course delivery, providing opportunities for effective learning, and we are enhancing our practice as a school. Another area is looking at QA and procedures for enabling learners and sponsors to give regular feedback in academic and non-academic provision. So we need a mechanism to communicate directly, and we need a mechanism to harvest feedback. So a mechanism where I can communicate with everybody directly, and a mechanism where I can harvest feedback, especially targeted feedback. So we're going to look at creating direct methods of communication which bypass teachers. Sometimes things like email lists can be really, really clunky because you've just got lots and lots of emails, and you've got email threads and things like that. So that's one way, depending on how many students you have. If you're into the hundreds of students, it might not be possible. To have an open door policy in the school, you need a door. So you need somewhere where the students can go and knock. And you could use something like Google Classroom if the manager is allowed into every Google Classroom and they can in some way harvest feedback there, or monitoring student interaction, student success. You could use a tool like Suggestion Ox. Now, Suggestion Ox is paid, but there are a couple of other different functionality, lesser functionality perhaps, feedback tools. You've got stuff like SurveyMonkey, which was mentioned before, which can be used, and then you can also use something like Mentimeter to create questions like I had there, which are open feedback, and having QR codes in every teacher's lesson where the student can just pop in the QR code and give feedback on the lesson, on the week, on whatever the manager deems appropriate. But I guess it is important for the manager to understand exactly what type of feedback they want and how they're going to be able to harvest that. But that's another example of a couple of different tools which can be used to scratch one particular itch or to plug a particular gap. If we look at other tools which are available, people have mentioned already Microsoft Teams and G Suite. Now, G Suite for Education isn't available for everybody. I think you have to be a state school to get it, but G Suite in general is accessible for everybody, and it's got lots of different functionality on it. You've got Google Forms, you've got Google Docs, you've got Calendar, Google Classroom, Drive, a number of different things which you can use, which are really, really useful for an online classroom. You've got Microsoft Teams as well. Microsoft Teams is, again, similar functionality. The Teams aspect is free. There's obviously paid addition for that as well. And you've got something like, you could use this with your own team. If you're a manager, maybe your trainers or whatever, your senior teachers, and they could be in different teams, but at least there is a repository for communication. There is a place that they can go in order to understand policies of best practice. You can upload files to this, and there's lots of different functionality for these two, which cover a wide range of areas, and which could be useful if you want kind of a one-stop shop, which is going to solve everything for you, I suppose. If you want to focus particularly on plugging one gap, you might say communication. There's other different tools like Slack, which is a project management tool, but you can use it for the creation of different teams, sharing of documentation, monitoring of performance and best practice as well. You've got something like LifeSize. On LifeSize, similar in a way to Zoom, but you can create different meeting rooms. So for example, every day at 2, That's our open door policy. Anybody can come in and talk to the manager about ABC. Any day at 1:30, you can speak to the IELTS teachers or the B2 teachers or whatever. But it creates these different rooms, I suppose, that you can just go into, and there's a person always there, or certainly there at a certain time for you to communicate with. Really, really useful for drop in and also for scheduling meetings that are regularly hosted, I suppose. You've got something like Screencast-O-Matic, like I said, with Camtasia, which allows you to record your screen. And this can be useful for clarity in staff communication and also clarity in teacher to student communication in the online context, especially in something like Zoom. A lot is often lost, especially in the fact that we cannot really read reactions so easily. And so perhaps we do need to record clear messages and put them in the drive or send them on or put them in the chat box in Zoom to ensure that people are actually getting what we're saying and they can re-listen to it at a lower level maybe. And you've got something like SoGo Survey or SurveyMonkey. Stuff like this is useful for collecting information. If you want to look at storage, we saw already Google Drive, we've got Box, we've got Trello. Trello can be used for storage and for project management as well. Really, really useful tool, which covers a lot of different areas depending on what your school needs, and quite a useful tool, Trello. I would recommend having a look at it. People have mentioned Moodle before. Similarly, Edmodo and Flipgrid perform similar functions as virtual learning environments, asynchronous environments where the students' portfolios can live, where they can live off live session, I suppose. And then you've got other things like Padlet and Bulb digital portfolios. Padlet is literally a wall you can use in class, or you can use it as the school notice board for social activities, the school notice board for whatever you deem necessary. It could be safeguarding notice board, for example. Bulb digital portfolios allows students to create their own individual portfolio. You could ask students to create Bulb digital portfolios where they do weekly feedback on the learner journey. Could be a little audio, video document, and you as a manager then can or teacher can then go in and have a look, and you can see how the student is getting on from what you can understand from their portfolio. So generally how they are finding their classes, how they're getting on with their classmates, and stuff like this can be a useful way of kind of soft touch harvesting of feedback. Or rather than investigate all of them yourself, this whole talk has been is taken from this NILE course, Take Your School Online. The 4 different units, the 4 different modules are the 4 areas which I talked about in this talk. What this course does is it has clear guiding questions for every unit in focusing our minds on what questions we could be asking and moving from the online, the real world context into the online context. It's also got video Q&As with practitioners who are in the middle of this process. We've got video tutorials on the different tools and how they can be used in different contexts. We also have the creation of a community of practice, and you can see from the amount of feedback that you're getting in these Mentimeter chats that everyone is bringing their own context to this, and they're bringing their own solutions, and it's really, really useful to be able to talk to people from different parts of the world and understand their context. So that is coming soon to nileelt.com, and that is generally me. I don't know if we have any time for questions. No, we do have time. Maybe Federica wants to come back and tell me if there's any questions at all. I can begin to answer. Maybe. I hope everybody stayed with me. That was pretty quick, I guess. You can see how sunny it is here. This is Dublin. It's always sunny. It's tropical. Thank you, guys. Lovely comments. Yeah, I think that obviously it's a massive amount of information to get through in 1 hour, but hopefully, there's some bits and pieces. Federica, you're there. There's some bits and pieces you can take from it, and I'm going to send on all of the slide. I think Federica will send on the slides and any of the downloaded information to hopefully give you some starter points to go on. Yep. Thank you. Please, yeah. A person or no. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
About having the parents know that you don't know the answer.
Wow. Whew. A child asks an academic question, for example,
Yeah,
or
I think it
a
was it
safeguard.
was most I think it was more about a vocabulary question, for example, because then there
Ah,
was
okay.
a
Well,
little.
God, sorry, this happens regularly. It people ask me vocabulary questions which I don't know the answer to regularly. So what I always do, the way I try to get out of it is if it's not directly in line with the learning outcome of the lesson. So, for example, we have a learning outcome for the lesson which we're going to go and we're going to try assess. If any language comes up, which students say, it's okay to say, look it up in a dictionary. We're going to focus on the learning outcome, so we're not going to dig too deeply into you know unpacking all of the vocabulary. We don't have time. We're going to focus on whether the skill development or the grammar or whatever. And you know, um, as somebody said, don't scold a child, but just say that's a lovely question, but we're going to focus on this. We don't want to spend too much time digging into all the vocabulary, for example. Or we can say, let's deal with that tomorrow, for example, and then you can have a bit of time to go look at it.
That's a super practical advice. Thank you, Chris.
No problem.
Someone else also said that teachers are allowed not to know everything 100%, of course.
Absolutely.
Another question that came up was how healthy do you think it is to upload saved lessons, I think pre-saved lessons, for secondary students with no interactiveness or mutual conversation? So do you think it's healthy to teach teenagers asynchronously?
No, not entirely. So I think that the blending of synchronous and asynchronous lessons needs to be really, really carefully thought through in terms of is it in line with the pedagogical approaches which you as a teacher or as an institution prefer. And I think if we think about lower level students, they're going to need a lot more live scaffolding of language development. So you might have, say for argument's sake, you might have an hour long learning unit, and that might be 15 minutes of an asynchronous task, so preparation where they get to watch a short video and do a little task, and then you might have 30 minutes or more of that feedback, that live session feedback, where you really get to scaffold and help them and support them and whatever else. And then they might have a little homework task for that 10-15 minutes as well. When they get to the higher level, you might balance that out a little bit more and give them a lot more asynchronous stuff, and they'll need less support and scaffolding. They'll need more collaborative tasks, whatever else. But I don't think we can say, teenagers, you've got 2 hours asynchronous, go and just do that, and then send me the answers. No, it's not going to happen. If you've got people who need to be scaffolded, supported, and they need key teacher intervention points, then I think you need to be really, really careful about how you arrange that. And I think there will always be a space for key teacher intervention throughout, especially for teenagers, throughout the education process.
Thank you. And I think this links really well with the next question, which is how long do you think the perfect class is for online class is for teenagers and young learners?
It depends exactly what is meant by an online class. So if I take, answer one, if I take it as an online class is solely live, you using a Zoom Zoom as the medium of education, I think you really can't have more than an hour, and even that is probably too long. I think ideally probably something like 40 minutes, in terms of for student attention. Ideally what I would do is, if we think about the school rethinking their education philosophy, what we should have is we do 20 minutes of a lesson, and then the students get a task, an asynchronous task, that we switch off our cameras, we switch things off, and they can go and they've got 10-15 minutes to complete that task. And then we come back and we do more feedback, 15-20 minutes in our live session. This gives a little safety valve where they might finish the task in 10 minutes, and they get 5 minutes to scroll through Instagram and just kind of have that bit of offline reset button, and then we come back to the live session. And I think training students to be able to do those 20-minute attention bursts is useful, because with the current generation of teenagers especially, attention spans are attention is quite difficult to hold, and we're not really going to hold it for an hour in a live session, especially when they have their phones and they have the computer. It's really tricky for the teachers. So micro sessions.
That is very true. Thank you, Chris. And there was Dilip asking a really great question, I think. So how would you ensure that he's calling them external stakeholders, I think meaning parents and, anyone that's in the house really, to help you with online teaching when you're doing synchronous teaching?
I always refer to my parents as my external stakeholders. How do you ensure? Yeah, so it's not the teacher's responsibility. So and this is something which needs to be clear to management. The teacher's responsibility is to assess the learner's needs and to help the learner develop their abilities in language or history, geography, whatever whatever subject you are teaching. The school's responsibility is to create procedures in order to ensure that all of the stakeholders' needs are met. So the stakeholders include the teachers, and the stakeholders include the parents. So if the parents need to be included, or the parents need to be asked for permission or something like that, should all be part of the school's policies and procedures. And in terms of whether you need the parents to help you to get the students to go to class, this needs to be a clear communication between the school and the parents, not the teachers and the parents. And this is, if any managers are watching, this really needs to be a burden which is taken off the teachers, because there's too much already, especially in the current situation, there's too much on teachers to have to plan the lesson. You're going through a complete change of the medium of delivery, a complete change of everything that you do. And then also you're asking them to try and wrangle parents and things like that. I think the school needs to have these clear policies and procedures which make it leave no doubt in mind what the school's what the parents' responsibility is in this context.
Thank you. I think that was great that someone is addressing managers and staff, because that's such an important part of this collaboration that it can be avoided. So thank you. Yeah. So once we convince parents that our online and especially asynchronous classes are valid and worthy, how do we convince students as well that we're still offering an equivalent service?
Yeah. So there's two things to this. The way you would convince students that the service that you're offering is valid is if they've got tangible progress. So and this comes back to the assessment. If you can appropriately assess success regularly and encourage the students to assess their own success, then they hopefully will begin to see, especially teenagers and adults, will begin to see progress as they would in a face-to-face context. Secondly, what I would recommend in terms of the use of technology, the use of the online context to redefine and enhance learning, is the creation of learner profiles in your virtual learning environment. So in something like Bulb or Flipgrid or Edpuzzle or whatever, Google Classroom, whatever forum you use, if they can begin to create their own personal identity as an English learner, as an English language learner or a language learner in general, and they can begin to see, oh, that's the writing that I did last week, this is the reading answers, this is the test, this is a recorded audio speaking that I put in this week. They can begin to go back and go, oh, I can see content there. I am building up a profile, a personal profile that, you know, is really a clear reflection of me as a learner. And I can begin to see, well, I didn't have this in a face-to-face context. I couldn't go back and see anything really in a face-to-face context, but it's all here. And that's going to make put the onus for reflection on success back on the student, and for them to begin to see, oh God, I am getting better, and I know that because I learned it last, you know. And I think that's a really, really important crutch for the teachers to rely on, to be able to push back on that and say, you know, you have the opportunity to go online and see how good you were 3 weeks ago, how good you are now, what progress you have made in terms of knowledge and language use.
Thank you.